everybody. So I'm Cyril Pernet, and I'm the co-chair of OHBM Best Practice Committee, which is one of the committee at OHBM. Next slide, yeah. So the responsibility of the Best Practice Committee are listed here. I'm just going to highlight the three which are underlined. So the best practice development, which relates to also the development of standard from OHBM. And the idea is that we want to review the document by OHBM membership. So it's very much a community effort. Of course, there's a subcommittee which is created from the BPC, different people assemble, they make a team, from that team they create the document. But then that document is put forward to the whole community for review. And so I think, if I remember, the first Cobudas MRI had something like maybe 100, 150 different people commenting on it, same for the MEG paper. And so it's like very much a community effort, even though it's initially developed by a subgroup. And so that's the responsibility of the BPC, is that we decide based on various input from the community, but also sometimes from council, about what kind of best practice we need to develop. Yes, next slide, please. And so the best practice and data analysis in sharing and sharing in neuroimaging, or COBINAS. OHBM aims to promote the science literacy, transparency, and reproducibility. That's what these documents aim at doing. So they are not checklists per se, because they are documents that promote these three aspects. And it's coming from the best practice committee and members. Otherwise, we also have something else, which is not a COBINAS document, not something that comes from OHBM, but something that we endorse. So, for instance, if you, and that's something that we can discuss here as well, like for instance, how many you develop another standard, another good practice, then you can just submit it to the best practice committee at OHBM, then OHBM endorse it. Well, I mean, of course, it's reviewed, but they're like, okay, it's just done the same way as we do things, and there's a lot of community feedback. It's something that works for everybody, and so we can endorse it. And that's personal. So I'm currently co-chair, but the jobs that we want to do next year, as I will take the chair, is also to reinforce the collaborations between societies. And so as I was, sorry, just go back on the previous, yeah. And so as the writing group to create the document, and in terms of publication, what happened is that this document is, first of all, a web resource. So typically you would have a website, some sort of arranged like a blog with like multiple pages and browsable, because this is quite big. This is also a good place where we can assemble feedback from the community. Then typically so far it was published as a preprint, but right now, because of the development of Aperture Neuro, which is the OHBM journal, which is quite new, so we are looking at how we can move that document and what kind of, because it's already been reviewed, so we are in discussion on how it's going to be published and what format. And then we also have like often an overview which has been published in the journal of choice. So far, for instance, we had 2 Nature Neuroscience and 1, I don't remember in which journal. And then, of course, it's also presented at the annual meeting. So what documents we have? At the moment, we have 3 COBIDAS, which are the COBIDAS for MRI, 1 for MEG, and WhatNet, which is a nomenclature for networks. Next. And then, yeah, at the moment, we also have the fMRI language mapping in process, which is basically a document for using fMRI in a clinical setting. And as I was saying, those documents are really resources, right? And so while the tables and checklists exist, so while we write the document, we also made tables and checklists, and that was something that was started right away from the Cobudas MRI by Tom Nichols. But these tables were initially mostly made to itemize the important information to be reported, whereas the document explain and motivate those choices based on evidence. So most of what the document says is, well, you need to report this, but why do you need to report this? right? So the documents are much more complete than just having a list. We say, well, this is why you need to do it. With the motivation being, again, the transparency and the reproducibility. So as I was saying, not everything goes into checklists. So we take, for instance, COBIDAS as recommended terminology, right? So let's take, for instance, the MEG one, where we, in agreement with INCF, yes, we, re-explain like the name of the different bands and frequency bands and what these bands should be. But again, doesn't have to be necessarily. Some of these are also for WhatNet, like how the different networks are called, how you want to subdivide them and call them. And so it's not necessarily very easy to put all of that into checklists. And also those documents are really best practices, possibly without reporting in mind, right? So if we think about the latest ones that we've done, which is the fMRI language mapping, it's really about clinical practice, right? And while some of the results that you can get from scanning your patients before doing surgery can be reported, and some aspects can be itemized again through checklist, it's not always possible. And so I will finish by this one, which is what is the minimal information. So if we take example from MRI acquisition, and so I was thinking about that when you were showing your slide, Ahmed, because you're saying this is our things. Is that what is a checklist for? What the question is, what's your cost function? Do you want the minimal to understand what people have done, or is it, for instance, the minimal to reproduce, right? And too much info because we can't report everything. So this is the table that comes from the COBIDAS MRI, for which will be revised this year. So then you can keep going. Then there's another, the table continues and continues and continues and continues. And this is only MRI data acquisition. So this is a checklist, and it's not about your study. It's just about what you need to report to know everything about your MRI, right? Then too much information in any case to become useful, right? We cannot have checklists which are that size. So the question, so one of the works that we're trying to do, and Simon, who's there, is also working on that with us in the COBIDAS, for instance, is like, okay, but we need to reduce these massive lists and tables, which are like, this is all the things which are very useful to know, but clearly you can't have how many of these lists you need for a publication, right? If you do that, because if this is only for your MRI, and then we've got a list as big for the EEG, so you do simultaneous EEG, MRI, or stimulation as you do, then what's the size of those lists? And but one of the reasons, for instance, even though we did think that those best practices were very useful and people like it, they are not used that much in journals. And the reason is because this is simply too big. And so there is a fine balance to find, and that's our experience, is that even though for the community it was very useful because you can learn a lot of things by reading with best practices documents, but the checklists are simply way too big. And so the question is, what is the checklist aiming at, right? What do we mean by, that's what you need? What do you need it for what, right? What is your cost function? What is you're trying to optimize for? And so that's our experience with COBIDAS. Thanks.